Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Frazer Anderson from the investment team at Vestigo Ventures. Today, I'm sitting down with our founding general partners, David Blundin and Mark Casady, to talk about trends in technology, financial services, and how those elements relate to the teams we've invested in. Gentlemen, this is a real treat.
Hi, Frazer.
Great to see you, Frazer. Thanks for doing this.
Happy to. So question for both of you. Aside from the elephant in the room, could you talk about what surprised you the most since we gathered together here last year?
Happy to take it. So one of the amazing changes in the past year is the rate of acceleration in AI that's become open source that our companies can just grab and go with. One of the more interesting changes is this GPT-2, GPT-3 algorithm that is over at OpenAI that allows computers to generate free-form text that can be used for either chatbots or for SEO or for just general content creation. The models that we were working with a year and a half ago were about 1 billion parameters, 1.5 billion parameters. The new ones are 100 times bigger in just a year. So massive acceleration in the technology that's available to our companies right at their fingertips.
That's fantastic. What I've seen is innovation on the part of incumbents really speeding up. And that's, of course, a nice thing to see for our portfolio companies. So it means they can be more engaged in doing, proof of concepts. They can be more engaged in getting contracts done, which is good. And we've kind of watched it go from asset management to banking to now the insurance industry, where there's lots of exploration of what can be done and how can it be done quickly. Which is a very nice trend and hasn't slowed down despite the elephant in the room.
Wonderful. And I think sort of taking the other side, what were some of the things, if you reflect, that we talked about last fall that really haven't been disrupted at all, kind of continued trends that haven't missed a beat?
Mark, after you.
Oh, thanks. So I like to think of it very simply, which is at the end of the day, financial services is about, thinking about risk, for example, moving that risk around, thinking about assets, reporting on those assets, thinking about how to make those assets worth more through the returns that they get, thinking about a wide range of assets that they deal with as well. So that business of moving assets, reporting on assets, protecting assets, it really hasn't changed. The modality has changed. We're obviously on Zoom for our AGM as an example, and I think nearly everyone feels relieved for not having to travel much. So that feels pretty good as things go. But if we look at it, the fundamentals haven't changed. And that's what's important to remember when we're thinking about investing and we're thinking about innovation.
Yeah, one thing that doesn't surprise me at all is that the transparency of the data that we have in our incubator at Kogo Labs, the things we can see into in society and see trends coming is just continued and continued and continued. And one of the questions I got from our LPs a year ago was, are there changes in cookie policies or whatever that are going to disrupt your visibility? And my answer was always, the rate at which you can acquire new data and see new things is accelerating much more quickly than the rate at which anything goes away. And so we've seen, we saw a news release that Fidelity account openings had doubled during COVID. I said, I wonder if I can see that clear as day in the data. And we just look into the databases and there it is. It's crystal clear in the data. Or another example, a company, carparts.com, public company that was accelerating in growth because they had turned on SEM traffic, Google SEM traffic, and their stock is up 10x. Can you see that in the data? It's like, yep, there it is, clear as day in the data. So not surprised at all that our visibility into everything going on is just exactly where it was and accelerating, if anything.
Wonderful. And Dave, you alluded to this briefly, I think, when you mentioned the shift from GPT-2 to GPT-3. But this, I know, very much relates to your thesis and the thesis that we've all adopted around chatbots. But I think it would be great if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, this is one of the coolest things that'll happen over the next 3 years, and it's highly investable. There was one theory of the world where all of this advanced technology is going to be controlled by the big 5 tech companies, so Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, et cetera. And then there's another view of the world where investable new companies are going to come along and they'll pick up those technologies and they'll run with them. Well, for whatever reason, it's turning out that those investments are way outperforming and those companies are growing like crazy. And we're seeing some companies now that have grown from idea to 300 million of revenue run rate in under 5 years using conversational AI to explain and guide users through complicated products. And some of the best complicated products or best markets are fintech, where products like insurance, mutual fund investments, all kinds of, we have a pet insurance company, and those transactions require explanation to the user. And traditionally, they've been sold over phone calls or through web forms. But now everybody's on a mobile device, and they don't want to be filling out complicated web forms or dealing with complicated online websites. So the chatbot version of that is absolutely the right solution. But it relies on conversational AI to be good enough and accurate enough and clear enough that the person using it can get to their answer as if they were talking to a human being. And that hit a tipping point in just the last year or so, where for many of these financial products, it's now very viable and actually a much better user experience to move it over to an AI chatbot. So that's a very investable theme.
Totally. I was speaking with Guy from Clerky the other day, and he said he just couldn't imagine how he would run his business without the chatbot interface. It is not a gimmick. It is the new way to do things for sure. And Mark, I have to apologize now because I'm about to put you on the spot.
Okay.
But could you tell us kind of what the driving assumptions are really for VVF2 and how they've shifted as we have completed our 20 investments in the first fund?
Yeah, I think the good news is a lot of the same, right? We have invested heavily in enterprise SaaS companies because they tend to scale fastest, and our thesis is that the financial service incumbents will partner with startups to be more successful. So that remains the key element of our investing for Fund 2. So that's, I think, important. I think the area of crypto has been one that we experimented with in Fund 1, and we just have seen that asset digitization and trading in crypto just has not gotten the tailwinds behind it that we hoped it would. So we're going to not have that in Fund 2 as a category. I will say that two companies we have in Fund 1 are good infrastructure companies in the space, so we are still hopeful that they will do just fine in that experiment. And we can't forget that the Federal Reserve is also doing an experiment in helicopter money, as it's popularly called, and that actually is driving RIAs to suggest a small allocation to Bitcoin and to a few other cryptocurrencies for their clients. And so we're seeing a little bit of a pickup that I think will be helpful to us, but not so much of one that we want to have that be a theme in Fund 2. And then I think the third big area for us has, of course, been B2C. That's been important because we've used Cogo Labs to validate the virality of those companies. And that is really critical that we use those data resources the right way and understand when somebody's doing something that obviously drives down their CAC and gives them a real ability to create a great model. I think we know the data finds really great companies. And so far we felt very good about the scaling of the companies we found in Fund 1. So we're hopeful to have even more in Fund 2. And just to put a plug in, Kuru was the first B2B company that XBLR that you built, Frazer, was able to find. So I'm hopeful that we'll see even more B2B opportunities through the use of Cogo as well. So I think that's a very exciting moment for us. And then the last thing about Fund 2 that's a little different than Fund 1 is it's bigger, about 100 million, maybe a little more. And Fund 1 was, of course, just under 60. So that allows us to take about 5% of the funds. We're going to set aside 5% and use that for accelerators and for opportunities for incubation where somebody else is doing that work. And we can be there as a small check provider to really help build our connection to the ecosystem. That'll be important for us to do so that entrepreneurs who maybe don't know us as well will get to know us over time and will allow us to create a bit of a farm team, if you will, that can feed the Fund 2 or Fund 3 or beyond.
Fantastic. And I've got another tough one, and Dave, I was hoping you could tee off on this. But what's something that you believe that most people in our industry don't?
I believe that most people in our industry don't. One thing that's really clear to me, and I'm sure people don't believe it yet, but they will soon, the whole conversational AI distribution mechanism is going to be bigger than TV. TV is about 75 billion. I remember a few years ago when we started predicting that internet and digital would be bigger than TV and then bigger than all other media combined. That was considered kind of like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, it's just massive at scale. And now, we're there where digital is, as of 2 years ago, actually passed all other media combined. So now within digital, I think the conversational AI chatbot component of it, which is very small today, but growing very, very quickly, will also bypass TV as a way that people find products and services, especially complicated ones.
Excellent. And now, Mark?
Yeah, I like to think about it this way, which is DeFi is a very popular word to use in fintech circles. It's sort of like having your vest, right? You got to talk about DeFi to be cool. And DeFi for most people means basically being able to do financial transactions anywhere, anytime. So it's really meant heavily around the payments mechanisms and also just making commerce convenient. Nothing wrong with that as an idea. I actually like to think about it very differently than that, which is DeFi and the word being deconstruction of finance. How do we take apart what we've built as an industry that might be about asset management or might be about banking or might be about insurance, risk transfer, and take that into smaller bite-sized pieces. So if there's 100 things that we do to make that work, you break it down into 100 pieces and then restack them in some way? The analogy I like to use is Lego bricks, right? You get a set, it builds the Death Star. That's fun. Then you tear it up and you build 100 other things, right, that make it work. And so what's fun to think about, deconstructed finance is what will be the different models that come up. The example that I like to use is how we think about exposure to assets. Today, if I buy a condominium, in Boston, maybe it's my first real estate purchase, and I've got to put down 20%, and that's $100,000. That might be the biggest asset I own. That's really scary to think that everything is my condo. I don't really like that idea as much as I might like real estate in Boston. And so instead, I'd rather maybe take 50,000 of it and diversify it in some other way. Maybe a portfolio of condos, maybe an equity exposure, maybe something else. You can't really do that today without having the mechanism that lets you break it down into small bite-sized pieces. And that is, for me, what DeFi will be. And that's a very different view than I think what the industry has adopted for DeFi so far.
Wonderful. And now, final question for both of you. I think I can make a general statement that most people that are watching this have found success in the financial services industry and remain leaders in the space. What would your advice be to our viewers or a similar audience to help them navigate really the sweeping changes that we're watching in fintech today?
Dave, you want to go?
Sure, I'd love to. So two things to really keep a close eye on. First is the gig economy migration that's going on is starting to apply in all kinds of traditional industries within fintech and financial services. But this migration of people to becoming independent and operating on a 1099 model, it really started with Uber, with all the drivers, and then it migrated from there and to elsewhere and elsewhere. But it's taking off in pretty much all categories now. So definitely want to keep a close eye on that. The other thing is to look at age. We saw with the Lemonade IPO a few months ago that you have a company with a huge valuation that has predominantly a user base selling insurance, a user base that's under the age of 35. And the way they interact is dramatically different from the 35 to 45s and the 45 to 55s. And a lot of people in financial services tend to chase the dollars, and the dollars skew old. But if you're investing, you want to think 5 years into the future and 10 years into the future. So everyone will be 5 or 10 years older. And if you look at the behaviors of the people that are 35 and under and how they interact, it's dramatically different. And you want to get ahead of that and pay very close attention. So have any report you're looking at or any business model you're looking at, ask them to break it out by age so that you can see where the trends are.
No, that's
fantastic.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that, Dave, is this whole idea that you're fishing in the next pond, right? That you're having to go there, and it may not move a lot of assets today, but you're seeing, as you say, behavioral change. It's interesting. And I think that's part of my advice, which is, as a large incumbent, it's hard to move the battleship. So you've got to look for ways to innovate, and the best way to innovate is by partnering with a startup. I think Mass Challenge in particular has done a really excellent job of reverse pitches, where the incumbent says, here's 3 problems I have. Can somebody solve these for me? And literally hundreds of startups look at those pitches and then submit an application, and they pick who they think is the best match to solve that problem. So that would be one piece of advice, is really think about how to run an innovation program like that and learn from it, and be willing to accept that there's going to be failures from it, and that's okay, because you're not betting the entire insurance company when you're doing those things. You're just betting a small process. I think the other thing to think about is, you can get overwhelmed when you think about the number of new ideas that come up, the number of companies. And as you know, David Frazer, we've looked at 1,500 companies or more to get to 20 names in Fund 1. It really is remarkable. And what's fun about that is you get to see 1,500 ideas and not meet 1,500 entrepreneurs, but a lot of really great ones. But what you find is there's some that really do make sense and fit our thesis and come into the portfolio. But don't you get overwhelmed by that, right? Your job is to think about what are your problems you're trying to solve, and really focus on the problem, and then let the market solve that problem for you. And we're obviously always here to help connect you to great startups.
Fantastic. Well, guys, this has been really fascinating, and what I particularly loved is I would say all of your points have actually been quite actionable. So I hope everybody enjoyed viewing and will think about this stuff. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Frazer.
Thanks so much, Frazer. Really appreciate it.
Cheers. Thank you.